graphic, but that's
Oh,
like you
wow.
gotta get into.
Good for you. That is so cool.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone.
I think you do it.
I now call to order the June 2025 meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Like I said, good morning. Thank you to those who are joining us by way of live stream, video, and those attending in the boardroom here on the Twin Cities campus and by way of Zoom. I'd like to welcome our student representative for today, Simon Moreno, and from the Duluth campus. We have a very full agenda today, and given the time needed to discuss both budgets, we were going to defer item 4, the peak update and review of the Morris campus plan to the future. I'll note that the Morris campus plan was a flip presentation, and if committee members have questions or comments, please send those to the board office. We look forward to circling back in the fall. So, first item of business this morning is to act on the proposed amendment to the Board of Regents policy conflict resolution process for employees. I'll note that no changes have been made to the proposed amendments since the committee reviewed them in May. So before we turn to discussion, is there a motion to adopt on behalf of the board the proposed amendments to the Board of Regents policy conflict resolution process for employees?
So moved. Second.
There's a motion and a second. Thank you. Now let's turn to discussion. I'll note that Associate Vice President Tina Marisam is here. Yep, she's here, but okay. I look up and there's nobody there, but okay. Is here to answer any final questions you might have. Are there any questions or comments from committee members? Okay. Hearing no discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. The motion is approved. Okay, that was fast. All right. Our next topic is to review the President's recommended fiscal year 2026 annual capital budget. I invite President Cunningham, Executive Vice President Goldman, and Vice President for University Services, Alice Roberts Davis, to take us through the proposed budget. President Cunningham, could you please begin?
Thank you, Chair Hipsch, and welcome, Vice President Roberts. Since joining the university nearly a year ago, it's been abundantly clear to me, I think, and to many of us here, and with the good guidance of the board as well, that we need to identify a new and more viable and the most cost-effective way to protect and extend the useful life of our buildings and other capital assets. Many of these were made possible through state funding by students who pay tuition and by donors who give to support the university's vision. The traditional models of protecting and investing in these vital assets is no longer sustainable. We have $8 billion of repairs needed over the next decade. We need to identify reliable and consistent sources for funding our capital priorities. I hear loud and clear the board's calls and charge for me and our team to find ways to ensure our infrastructure is maintained and improved to support the education of our students and researchers. Today, we're proposing a change, a bold and innovative plan born from the decline in and unpredictability of our state funding that puts the university in charge of our own destiny, while always, of course, looking for state partnership. We understand that in difficult state budget times, there is an unpredictability to what we get for our capital assets, and that unpredictability, as I sit down with our team, paralyzes our team in an ability to plan year over year assets for a $5 billion infrastructure and buildings. We will invest significantly now, and the team will be talking about that, to ensure we can draw from funds when we need them, making sure we can update and equip our buildings and infrastructure when it's needed, and not solely dependent on others' timelines. We will always need and welcome state support. I'll remind folks we have $8 billion of needs in the next decade, but we must plan how we will begin with the budgets that we have and with the human resources we have to begin to address predictability moving forward on a timeline that we know as we are responsible for the university to move it ahead. So I'm really excited. I want to thank in advance EVP Goldman and Vice President Roberts Davis on really just changing up the thinking here and bringing some new ideas on how we might manage and move ahead eventually with what will be modern infrastructure for our people and our mission. And our students deserve updated infrastructure, and our researchers deserve this, and we must plan for it with the things that we do and can control. And so with that, I'll turn it over. Thank you so much.
Thank you, President Cunningham. Good morning, Chair Hipsch and Regents. I am really excited to be here this morning to talk about capital budgets and building projects. Between May and June of each year, the board reviews and approves the university's annual capital improvement budget for the upcoming fiscal year. This is the last stop for the annual capital cycle and reflects the current year one priorities of the 6-year capital plan and the state capital request that we prepared last summer and brought to this board for review and action last fall. As a reminder, the 6-year capital plan is our main tool for planning capital investment priorities that the university will pursue for the next several years, as well as which of those priorities we will seek state support for in our state capital request. As soon as we wrap up this topic this month, my team and I will busy ourselves and dive right back into updating the 6-year capital plan for next year, and then see you again this fall to go over that plan. But for today, we will focus on the projects to be implemented this fiscal year, FY 2026. Before I get into the details, I wanted to remind you of how this all works for the annual capital budget. The budget includes individual projects that are greater than $5 million, and this is a notable change from how we've done it in the past when any project over $1 million was brought forward. But as a reminder, this board voted to update the threshold in February of last year after several months of deliberation. This policy change will better align with the majority of our Big Ten peers, and it will help us find a good balance that ensures that we have good governance while also reducing your undue administrative burden. All of the line items in the projects appear on the budget, must have been completed through pre-design, and they have to be fully funded in order to be completed, or in order to be included. And finally, the budget authorizes the listed projects to move into design and construction in the coming year. This is a breakdown of the broad categories in the FY 26 capital budget. I'll just begin by pointing out that the materials you are reviewing today were prepared and submitted before the state legislature met in a special session this past Monday. We are so fortunate that the legislators passed a state bonding bill that will provide $60 million of the $200 million HEPA request that we made for critical facility repairs. In addition, the university will receive $8 million in grants through the transportation bill to fund permanent railing improvements along the Washington Avenue pedestrian bridge. The materials we bring before you next week will reflect that update, and we will ask you for action at that time. Next are university-funded projects, which are funded with any combination of university resources without any state-supported funding. And then finally, the budget includes repair and replacement, or R&R funds, that cover a number of small-scale projects for facilities, including roof repair, HVAC repair, et cetera. Although the R&R projects don't necessarily meet the dollar threshold for inclusion on their own, we include them for awareness of what the university is investing in and how we're upkeeping our buildings. So for this year, the FY 26 capital budget includes 2 university-funded projects. First is a solar energy project that will allow us to install solar panel arrays at multiple locations across the Twin Cities campus in alignment with the Regents-approved Twin Cities Climate Action Plan. Sites will include parking lots and rooftop assemblies across the East Bank, West Bank, and St. Paul campus. Construction will be funded with university debt and repaid with savings from our production of electricity at a lower cost and purchasing it from Xcel, as well as other production incentives from Xcel. Next is Betty's Apple House, which will be constructed at the Landscape Arboretum. It's a brand new apple house to meet the growing retail demand, and it will feature exhibits that share the science and history behind the U of M's fruit breeding research, including the Honeycrisp apple. Visits will still be free, and the current Apple House will remain open seasonally until the new location opens in 2027. The project is funded entirely from gifts, and it will be named in honor of lifetime supporter of the Arboretum, Betty McMillan. There will be potential additions To the list, those projects have not yet met the readiness requirements for inclusion in the capital budget at this time, but are likely to be added through an amendment later in the fiscal year. As I mentioned earlier, the Washington Avenue pedestrian bridge was funded through the transportation bill passed by the legislature on Monday, and we can officially say that it will move from potential to a real project. And again, we are so grateful for the legislature's work to get this across the finish line, and we look forward to implementing these life-saving changes as quickly as possible. Next, the Lebovitz Center for Sales Excellence in Duluth will renovate space in the library annex building to create a state-of-the-art sales, teaching, and learning center. Construction will address aged mechanical systems like life safety, code upgrades, sales center programming, and library activities. The anticipated total cost of the project is $15 million, with $9.5 of that coming from the $60 million that we were granted in HEPR this week, and the balance will primarily be from UND fundraising efforts. The project team will take the next few months to finalize pre-design and confirm the funding plan, at which time we'll return to you for a capital budget amendment. The capital budget also includes several university-funded repair and replacement, or R&R pools. These funds are used to tackle many smaller scale projects such as elevator upgrades, HVAC and mechanical equipment replacement, parking lot resurfacing, LED lighting conversion, and so forth. This table organizes funds by campus, primary purpose, and source. The amounts can vary a little from year to year depending on available balances and project timing. However, it's worth pointing out that the operations and maintenance funded R&R, the primary internal source of funding for basic facility repairs, has remained mostly flat for more than a decade. This lack of sufficient predictable funding has made it difficult for us to strategically plan and manage facility upkeep, and combined with declining support from the state has resulted in our very large facility renewal need. With that, I will turn the presentation over to Executive Vice President Goldman to outline our exciting new proposal that rethinks how we approach repair and replacement. Executive President.
Thank you, Vice President Roberts Davis. Appreciate that update. So for today, if we can go one slide, Alice, that'd be great. Thank you for driving. So as I've sat here for the last 7 months, and you all have sat around this horseshoe a lot longer, the only way we are going to get a step ahead from our crumbling infrastructure is to define our own destiny. We have to have the fortitude, we have to have the willingness, and we have to have the will to make the hard budgetary decisions in order to start to allow for some long-term investing. We are appreciative of what the state did, but unfortunately, the unevenness of state funding, the politics around it, do not enable us to do long-term planning as we start to think about our infrastructure. A perfect example is the Mayo Building. Everybody knows that the Mayo Building at some point does need to come down. Alice's team, who's amazing, when they met with the president and myself, explained that without a steady path of resource, without the ability to know what is coming in order to think about space planning, space movement, it's almost impossible to do those kinds of projects. And the analogy I use is I feel like we're holding our facilities together with bubble gum and baling wire. And the reality is we've got to find a better way to do it. So with that, what I'd like to talk about is an exciting program that we've come up with in order to invest $750 million in our critical facility renewal over the next 10 years. To do this, we're going to have the fortitude. So the budget that you will see in the next item has an increase to O&M R&R of $10 million. Now, historically, we've taken these and just funded the $10 million for projects around campus. We are so far behind, and the need is so great. We've got to find a way to catapult in order to tackle more projects sooner, more diligently, and with planning. So what we have in this budget is a $10 million reoccurring allocation to O&M, that from that, we'll be able to go and borrow $150 million. Remember, the $10 million recurring is there every year. So that will be there every year for the next 25 or 30 years, depending what level of debt we do, to pay off that $150 million. Then we have the fortitude next year and the year after to either have $5 million for the next 2 years or $10 million in 2028 to borrow another $150 million, and so on for the next 10 years. So at the end of 10 years, we will have $50 million of reoccurring allocation by way of our budget process and the ability to self-define our destiny to the tune of $750 million for investment into our infrastructure. In addition, people may remember that the Gopher Football Stadium and the Biomedical Discovery District, the state has partnered with us, and they are paying some of that debt service to the tune of $10.25 million for the Gopher Stadium and $13.9 million for the Biomedical District. Gopher Stadium is up in 4 years, and now is the time to start via our government relations team laying the groundwork in order to get that $10.25 million that's already in the budget allocated towards another $150 million of renewal into our campus. And then the Biomedical District, another $13.9 million, will give us the ability to hopefully have the state partner with us to add another $360 million of renovation and repair to our buildings. Next slide, please. So what we're proposing, what we're presenting, and what we're planning is an opportunity to invest over $1 billion, defining our own destiny into our critical crumbling infrastructure to give us the ability to plan, to give us the ability to determine what makes sense, and also rethinking how we partner with the state. Our attempted HEAPR has been, I'd say, sporadic at best. We're happy with what we got this year. We were hours away from getting nothing. Last year, we got nothing. And what we want to try to think about is resetting and what you'll see in October, rather than have 100 things that we throw up on the wall and hope that the state will fund, that we pick 3 or 4 projects. And we don't think about phase 1 or phase 2, because we all know phase 2 of projects, unfortunately, tend never to happen. That we come up with 3 or 4 projects, and that we lobby hard, we push hard, and we try to get those successfully over the goal line. These then become ribbon cutting. These then become front page. These then become something that our members, our board, and our entire community can be proud of. So with that, we're happy to answer questions. I'm excited about this plan forward and appreciate all the support around it.
Thank you, Vice President. Is there any discussion? Okay, I just want to, Mary, go ahead.
Thank you. And I just, when I read the proposed university-state partnership idea, why haven't we ever thought of that before? That's, I think, brilliant. I think it's logical. Of course, the state doesn't have to go along with that, but I think now we've offered a solution that is already in the budget and that provides long-term sustainability to a certain extent. So thank you for that.
Well, I'll just comment. I think this is really important work that you're doing. I think it's mandatory we do this. We have all these buildings, and you get to a point in these buildings where if you're not maintaining them to a certain level, it costs a lot more money to maintain them. And so we have to get ahead of this. And I too agree with Regent Davenport on, you know, if the state gives us these 3 or 4 ribbon cutting projects, whatever, we'll take care of them. That's the promise. You give us the building, we'll take care of them. You know, and that's, I think they can buy into that too. And I think, yeah, we've been waiting too long, I think, for the legislators to step up, and they frankly have too many commitments. And so we're going to have to do this ourselves somewhat. And the plan that you laid out has seemed pretty painless, so thank you. Student Simon.
Thank you, Chair Hibbs.
Yeah.
Thank you, Regent Goldman. I like the idea of changing it from doing a bunch of different plans to down to 3 to 4 plans in general to push forward to the legislators. My question for you is, and I guess a comment, they love when students come in. They're a bit more agreeing with students when they come in, 'cause they can help both educate us and we can educate them on some things. What is your plans to get students involved in these plans? We go to the Capitol at least twice a year to lobby for different bills and different things going on. So what would you do for the student governments and the university students themselves to get them involved to push these acts forward?
Yeah, if I may, thank you, Representative Marino. So, and I don't know if our government relations team is here today, but we are deeply committed to partnering closely with the student government. I know that since Director Keel came on this spring, there's been a weekly meeting, I think often involving pizza, as is a good idea generally, with students around what our priorities are at the Capitol and how to really reinvigorate that. But we had a great Capitol Day this year, which I met with students all across each of the campuses coming and talking. So, more and more, right? And I think to EVP Goldman's concept, we will still be working on any number of projects that we will then fund with the funds that we are setting aside internally, and then we'll provide some big exciting ideas to the legislator across the different campuses, and certainly students champion those and coming along with us and knowing them and discussing how they would use them and how ultimately all these things we do are how to improve the lives and the experience of students on campus, of course, is amazing partnership that we welcome.
Thank you. Regent Verhalen.
Thank you. I really wanted to thank both of you for bringing forward, and your teams, I know, who worked really hard behind the scenes on this, for bringing forward really creative solutions for real issues. Fully acknowledging this doesn't solve everything everywhere all at once, but it is a way for us to demonstrate a very thoughtful, meaningful, and purposeful approach to issues that it's not easy to maintain. It is very hard to go and get a philanthropic donation to tear down a dilapidated building. It is very difficult to try and explain how expensive it is to retrofit a facility for needs that are there for students, for researchers, for access, et cetera. And so from my perspective, this not only brings forward an approach, but also leverages the direction we've been talking about for the last couple years of needing to think thoughtfully about ways to also make those capital investments to then save on O&M in the future. The solar projects are exactly an example of that. And so thank you to the teams who worked on this. We know there are many, many hands behind the scenes that are doing this, but I will be supporting the president's recommended budget.
Thank you. Thank you. Regent Wheeler.
Yeah, thank you. And I think Regent Verhalen said it very well. I think this is really wonderful to have some leveling of what we can expect to be able to invest. And I think it's incumbent on us to do so. And I also thank you for giving us as regents like a sightline to what we have to see in that OMN budget to continue this going forward. So it allows us to make sure we hold, the university accountable for that $10 million per year. Recurring. So I appreciate that as well. Thank you very much. Well done.
Regent Mayron.
Thank you. I've been a big proponent of wanting us to find ways to control our own destiny.
Pull the microphone back.
Oh,
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Big proponent of looking for ways to control our own destiny as opposed to relying on other partners who have other interests and needs that they're trying to attend to as well. And this proposal does that and puts the onus on us to basically solve our problem. And does it in a thoughtful way, I think financially, what you're proposing to hopefully make that happen. So kudos again to all of you for what you've brought forward.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, we'll move to the next item on our agenda.
May I make a comment?
Go ahead, yeah.
Chair Hipsch, maybe as a reminder and a little bit as a prelude to the next conversation, when we say in our current budget proposal this year, which I understand is complicated for many people, that what we're doing with this budget is investing in our people and our infrastructure, This is what I mean when I say we're investing in our infrastructure part, right? In order to do that, we have to make other budget choices. But ultimately, to be responsible to the students who do choose to come here, we need to provide them facilities that are not falling apart at the roof and coming apart at the heater. And so that's part of what we're doing when I say we're investing in our people and our infrastructure.
Thank you, President Cunningham. Okay, our third item is to review the President's recommended fiscal year 2026 annual operating budget. Joining President Cunningham and Executive Vice President Goldman for this budget is Vice President and Budget Director Julie Tonneson. Before we review the budget, I'd like to note that the board is interested in feedback from members of the university community on the budget. This afternoon at 4:15 p.m., the board will hold a public forum here in the boardroom, and members of the public are invited to sign up beginning at B45 in the lobby. Additionally, we are accepting written, audio, and video comments by way of the board's virtual forum on our website at regents.umn.edu. The board will meet on June 18th for a special meeting to act on both the operating and the capital budgets. And with that, President Cunningham, could you please proceed?
Thank you, Chair Hipsch. As you've heard me say a lot recently, and as I've messaged the community broadly, it has been sort of a unique year here for us together, with the greatest honor to be here to serve this year. But higher education is having a particular moment this year and facing unprecedented challenges. And the University of Minnesota, although very gratefully is not in the national news on these, that does not mean that we are immune to them, and we are indeed feeling these challenges regularly. The FY26 operating budget proposal addresses this reality, which we did not make, but we do have to manage through, offers practical, forward-thinking solutions to meet our long-term challenges today, and to ensure that we emerge from this time and the university and its people and its infrastructure thrive long-term. Just to put a few numbers around this, the issues, those practical issues that we're facing are significant reductions in federal funding that I've talked about with the board before. To date, those already, and these go up every single day, have already seen stop work order cuts to the tune of $40 million. That is just in the last several months here of cuts. We anticipate that next year's federal research allocations coming out of agencies like NSF, NIH, and DoD, those cuts, if you're following them nationally, those agencies are anticipated to be decreased by 30%, 40%. We should plan for less federal funding this year. This is a practical reality. In addition, while we are very grateful for the state support, and I really want to call out our legislators who I know in very difficult budget times really held the university up and did not decrease our funding in any substantial way. For that, we are very grateful, but it has been flat over time. That effectively means a 3 to 4% reduction in our spending power. If we count this year and now the next 2 years of that flat spending power, that is a $75 million real purchasing power reduction that the university budgets have to account for. If we add the 75 million and the 40 million, you can see we're already well into hundreds of millions of dollars, for which our management team and our board here then has to manage how we're going to address a thriving university going forward. That shortfall is $115 million and going up every day with decreases projected in federal funding. I wrote to the faculty and staff last week noting that in this reality that we all, again, did not dream up, but we are managing through, the status quo is not an option. To ensure the university is on a path to short and long-term financial sustainability, our response to this very historic time is reflected in the proposed budget through both targeted cuts and strategic investment. Forward-thinking strategic investments can and must exist alongside the difficult decisions of program scope reductions. Some of those strategic investments we just talked about in terms of the infrastructure, for example. The scope reductions that we are proposing impact all campuses in college, and with much thanks to the work of the deans who make those decisions locally and chancellors as to what's needed. They won't be easy, but they will refocus the entire university on the most mission-critical programs and investments, as anyone needs to do when all of a sudden your funding has been cut by millions of dollars. Our strategic planning process is underway, and in each step, we're refining and defining the priorities we'll pursue most aggressively. Our budget this year lays out the groundwork for achieving strategic plan goals that will, of course, improve student success, create buildings, infrastructure, et cetera. Well, we are proposing substantial tuition increases, and this is very painful for all of us. We're most committed to our students. We're most committed to the affordability of our students and accessibility of our students. I'm also committed to our students once they're here and how we provide them an excellent, outstanding education. We remain committed to supporting those with the greatest need. We can be proud of the ways that we do this, including graduating half of our students without debt. The Twin Cities tuition, adjusted for inflation, is 7% lower than it was 10 years ago. So I'm going to say that again. 7% lower than it was 10 years ago when adjusted for inflation. Even with our proposed increase, it would still be 3% lower than it was. So again, if I have a bumper sticker for today, it is a difficult time. We do not like raising tuition for our students, but we are not running away with tuition increases compared to inflation. Our proposed increase on total is 3% lower than it was for in real dollars cost than it was a decade ago. And even more importantly, we are a public land grant university with a focus on accessibility. For those with family incomes of less than $110,000, the net price of tuition is a whopping 39% lower than it was 10 years ago, adjusted for inflation. Our tuition has not kept pace with inflation, and we have underinvested in many ways because of that. Again, if I had a bumper sticker, those would be my bumper sticker items. I want the people and everyone in Minnesota to know that we have done an excellent job at keeping costs low for our students compared with inflation, while we still understand that those costs are real and difficult for families. This tuition increase that we propose will ensure that we also invest in our infrastructure, as we discussed earlier, invest in the people that are teaching our students going forward. It allows us to make sure that the people who are working every day with students, that their compensation keeps up with inflation so that they are not also taking a 3% and 5% cut. All of this for many years of after many years of underinvestment in our workforce, for which this board has heard over and over again from our faculty and staff. One example of this is that merit increases have not gone to adjunct faculty consistently, and I've heard from board members about this. I am committed to better understanding this and hearing and acting on the recommendations as we address this important segment of our employees also. We will hear more about that focus after lunch. We believe, and my team believes, that this balanced budget positions us to be strong stewards of the university mission, both now and into the future. And so now, to provide all the details, thank you very much, of the proposed operating budget, I will turn it over to Vice President Townsend. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and thank you, President Cunningham. I am happy to be here today to help present this recommended operating budget for FY26. And following President Cunningham's important statements about the environment we're living in and this budget's response to it, I will walk through these materials, adding some details and some information that will support those messages and hopefully answer some questions along the way. To put our discussion today in context, July 1 marks the beginning of a new biennium in the state's budget cycle, the 2026-27 biennium. And within that, it is the annual budget for FY26 that is before you today. This budget does factor in projected costs and priorities that were the driving components for our biennial request to the state, but it incorporates no increase in state funding. As you are aware, the state has finished its budget, and we have reviewed the changes in our appropriations within the higher ed bill. There are significant modifications to O&M rider language and the restricted state specials, restructuring into different and new categories and changing amounts. They've made it very confusing. However, the changes will not alter any of the recommendations in this budget. We will have some new specific targeted state special activities, and some current activities will end, leading to a net reduction in our current program appropriations in state specials of roughly $7 million. But our basic operating appropriations, O&M, and those that are within the state specials are flat. Later in this presentation, we will discuss the impact of that result, but for now, let's just note that this recommended budget for FY26 is based on flat state support. In addition, it incorporates all other funds and activities that make up the remainder of our budget. In the end, we're asking you to approve the framework recommendations, but also all the other estimates and plans represented in the full All Funds FY26 budget before you today in Attachment 2. So what exactly is in the All Funds budget? There's a lot of detailed information in the budget materials that are included in the docket that we feel is important to document as part of the approval process. And we won't have an opportunity to go through it all in this hour. So our intent today is to highlight the pieces we feel provide the best summary of what we are asking you to approve next week. Starting with the revenues, this pie chart for FY26, excluding internal sales, incorporates the President's recommendations as well as estimates of ongoing activity. The total projected revenues of $4.8 billion are distributed across restricted, auxiliary, and unrestricted categories. Reds for restricted, yellow for auxiliary, and greens for unrestricted sources. 38% of the budget will come from the O&M state appropriation and tuition combined. Revenues in total are projected to be up approximately $21 million from this year. This is a net result of some significant changes. Increases in tuition revenue, in auxiliary funds, and in restricted gifts, endowment earnings, and contracts are offset by a reduction in sponsored grants and the accompanying projected reduction in indirect cost recovery revenues. We'll talk about this in a bit more on the next slide, but visually here, you can see that the sponsored activity and ICR combined is projected to be 20% of our overall budget, more than the O&M appropriation and second only to tuition as a major resource. And this large portion of our budget, this 20%, is where the greatest risk currently lies in funding our future. We're not alone in this, as President Cunningham mentioned, and as you are aware, it is not our unique actions or inactions that are driving this risk. It's something happening to us along with our peers, and it is something we are all attempting to navigate in the most strategic and responsible way possible. Just how much is at risk now? Based on the most recent activity over the last 5 years, we know that on average, 59% of our sponsored research is supported by the federal government. Applying that to the projected $750 million total direct sponsored revenue built into the budget on the previous slide, which is down already from this fiscal year, would mean an additional almost $443 million, or 9% of the total pie, is at risk for potential reduction, holding, freezing, or delaying. In addition, the corresponding ICR revenue, those funds meant to reimburse us for a portion of our research infrastructure costs, is also at risk. On average, 71% of ICR comes from the federal government. That would mean another $155 million is at risk for potential reduction. This will automatically happen as the direct sponsored activity drops, but in addition, there are federal plans being debated and litigated that would drop the federal reimbursement rate from a high of 54% to 15%. And they could indeed propose other changes to these levels and their practices. And finally, we will work with the state to understand if there could be additional reductions to any funds we receive from the state as direct pass-throughs from the federal government. The all funds budget projections based on estimates and recommendations in this budget are displayed on Attachment 2. The major assumptions on the revenue side include what you see here. As I've already mentioned, the assumption on state funding is flat, and we will talk about what that means in terms of buying power over a period of several years on an upcoming slide. Sponsored grants, again, we're estimating a reduction of at least 10%, or $85 million from the current year, and the risk is the full remaining federal base of $400 to $500 million. ICR is expected to drop at least 10% compared to this year, following years of steady growth. We know this could drop significantly more, and we are working on contingency plans with our units related to those potential changes. We are anticipating continued growth closer to historical trends and inflation rates for most other types of revenue, generally in the 3 to 3.5% range, with the exception of our auxiliary revenues, which we anticipate to be up closer to 5.75% based on rate increases and occupancy levels. We'll talk more about the housing and dining plans in an upcoming slide in combination with the recommended tuition changes. Moving to the corresponding all funds spending projections, Expenditures and transfers out, excluding internal sales, will also be roughly $4.8 billion, which is an estimated increase of 1.2% from the current year, or roughly $52 million. The distribution by slice remains consistent with prior years, but there are a few takeaway items embedded in these numbers and the changes compared to FY25. First, projected spending on salaries is up 3.5%, which reflects the recommended salary plan, plus the projected impact of reallocations, required downsizing associated with the loss of grants, and regular turnover. Additionally, the departmental charges for fringe benefits are expected to increase at that same rate as salaries, 3.5% overall, as there are no major changes required in the fringe rates themselves. Outside of salary and fringe categories, the expenditure side of the budget reflects growth levels of 3.25 to 3.5% in most categories, reflecting the impact of inflation, which varies by unit and activity, and the impact of reallocations is also sprinkled throughout these categories, which holds the cost growth down. And finally, the projection of sponsored grant activity on the expenditure side matches that of the revenues, down $85 million or 10% due to federal actions we've already discussed. Note that this projected increase of 1.2% for expenditures and transfers out is markedly down from what it otherwise would have been if not for the change in sponsored activity and the recommended levels of reallocation in this budget. Without those changes, I estimate we would have projected a growth rate of roughly 4.5%. And you can see that impact easily here on this next slide. This table shows the annual increases in total spending following the turbulence of the pandemic years. As you can see here, the last 3 years have shown relatively stable growth. We do have areas of spending that traditionally see rates of inflation exceeding the typical CPI reported rate, but these occur differentially across our units, and we manage them in different ways. But of particular note here is how we have contracted our spending plans for FY26. These rates of growth focus only on expenditures, excluding the transfers out to the plant fund. And it's clear to see that we have made very difficult decisions in this recommended budget that will hold down the rate of growth in some of the basic operating costs. An $85 million drop in projected sponsored revenue means the same drop in spending. So that is reflected here. And on top of that, there will be reduced spending due to the recommended reallocations, which we will address on an upcoming slide. Moving now from the overall all funds summary of the budget to the primary recommendations focusing on the framework funds. We'll start with this slide we've used in the past to remind you how to kind of connect the dots between the all funds budget that I just summarized and the more in-depth conversation we'll have next about the funding and investment decisions we're proposing as part of what we call the budget framework. This picture is a way of viewing the whole budget, and it works best to start in the middle with the gold box. These are the resources we bring to your attention throughout the year, and ultimately and most importantly, they are the resources we, as leadership, make decisions about as we develop the budget. We need to decide what to ask for from the state of Minnesota in terms of new appropriations. We also have to decide what to plan for tuition rates and how much of their state and tuition funds we want to ask our units to reallocate. And then we always have this extra category at the bottom called Other Unit Revenues, which takes us over to the left column under the Other Revenues heading. Here you'll see the non-state and non-tuition funds that the units differentially generate based on their activities. We hold our leaders and our financial managers accountable for balancing these budgets. So the first goal for each of those funds is to grow enough to cover the cost increases for the activities that are currently paid for by those funds. Some of these are restricted to a particular purpose, so that aspect must be managed as well. If any of this revenue in particular places is unrestricted and growing beyond what is needed to cover costs, then it comes to the table to combine with the other resources in the gold box to help pay for what you see in blue. The state appropriation and the tuition need to grow, just like the other revenues, to cover compensation cost increases, priority initiatives, inflation, facility needs, et cetera. And if they don't grow enough, or to temper their growth, we force reallocations and we leverage that available growth in the other funds where we can in order to pay for the things in blue. The other revenues on the left supplement on the margin and where appropriate the plans for state appropriations and tuition. We are slowly becoming more dependent on these other revenues. But to date, their growth overall has not been large or consistent enough to take the place of the need for growth in the extremely important state and tuition dollars. The result of going through a review of each item on this slide and making decisions along the way is what you have before you in the form of a full recommended budget package for FY26. In summary, and we'll dig into these a bit more detail on some upcoming slides, the new incremental framework spending of $198.8 million, which is the blue box from the previous slide for FY26, can be described in the 7 categories shown here. Modest compensation increases in response to inflation, advancing programs and services in a purposeful way, core operating needs, regular but growing facility and technology infrastructure costs, a new strategic investment fund, a meaningful investment in our serious facility repair and replacement needs, and a small negative tuition variance in a handful of units. On the resource side, how we propose to pay for that incremental $198.8 million of spending is summarized here. 45% of the resource plan, a full $92.1 million, would come from accessing existing revenues in units through reallocations/budget cuts. 35% would be from our recommendations and estimates related to tuition changes for FY26. 13% would come from growth in other revenues within the units, and the final 7% would be from accessing unit-level reserves. The total resource gain is $7.3 million more than the proposed investments on the previous slide, which we recommend holding as a jump start to addressing FY27 cost increases. Now for more of the details, starting on the resource side. In a good year, we would be able to start the description of this revenue change section of the presentation with an explanation of what increases we are seeing in the state appropriation. But as you know and heard, this year we cannot do that. We requested a $235 million increase across both years of the biennium. The first row of the table, the $120 million ask, was for core mission items, inflation, compensation, compliance, et cetera, and was proposed as the 45% portion of a partnership in which the university was already planning to pay for the other 55%. In addition, we asked for new initiative money for the 3 categories you see here below that, focusing on areas of critical need and priority growth opportunities. We're receiving none of those increased funds from the state, so we have to address all of the cost growth and the critical investments through different means. By holding our appropriation flat and pushing cost increases onto other sources, the state is eroding the buying power of the funds they already are providing to us. In FY24, our recurring O&M appropriation base was increased roughly $51 million, but that new base remained flat for FY25 and is again remaining flat for the next biennium. In this period of cost growth, hovering around 3.5%, that same total with no increase is able to provide for less and less. As President Cunningham mentioned, over this 3-year period with no increase, the loss of buying power approaches $75 million. For FY26 alone, it means that we have to make tough decisions about spending, budget cuts, and tuition, in part to pay for what is effectively a $24 million loss in state support. Of course, we appreciate that the appropriation is flat as opposed to being reduced in the face of what was a looming state deficit in the 28-29 biennium. It appears they may have addressed that problem, but risk for reduced appropriations coming out of future legislative sessions is a real risk. In the meantime, this appropriation level means we have to manage the budget to achieve our goals with the tools that are available to us. The first set of tools we have, and the largest resource change we are proposing, relates to our recommendations for the use of other unit revenues and internal reallocations. This set of incremental resources totals almost $134 million. There are 3 components to the use of unit-level revenues and reserves, that top $41.8 million box. First, every year there is a variance between actual and budgeted tuition revenue. We recently experienced a couple of years with negative variances, but this year, our FY25 tuition revenue is coming in above budget. Ultimately, and for a whole variety of reasons, students registered for more courses than we anticipated, and the associated revenues represent a growth in the tuition base, which can be applied to new recurring expenses beginning in FY26. Without this, our recommendations for spending, tuition rate changes, and reallocations would have had to be different. Second, for FY26, units propose to dedicate a small amount of available growth in other revenues to cover costs reflected in the framework. This primarily includes growth in some unrestricted fee and sales income in some isolated units. And finally, we are planning the use of one-time O&M balances that units have available to cover recurring costs for 1 year as a bridge to their future revenue increases or savings. This is an appropriate use of funds and evidence of good financial management, allowing us some flexibility to achieve our goals over a more reasonable time frame. Then, in addition to these other resource gains, we're planning an historically high $92.1 million of internal budget cuts and reallocations. So first, some history on our internal reallocations. As this chart shows, internal repurposing of existing resources through deliberate decisions to eliminate or reduce spending has consistently occurred in each of the last 10 years, and actually even way before that. FY26 is notable for a couple of reasons. First, and most obviously, the magnitude of the reductions is historic. While we have planned scenarios of a higher percent, we have not actually implemented this level of cuts. Second, we directed units to submit proposals, which we have now included in this budget, that are designed to reduce programmatic scope. The intent here is to actually stop using our scarce resources to support some activities so that we can direct our investments to current and emerging priorities. We simply cannot continue in a business as usual way. We will remain a top-ranked, comprehensive university, but not one that can do absolutely everything for everyone. It's hard to know right now what FY27 will bring, but this mindset will likely need to guide our plans for the next few years. And what does this mean for our units and the programs and services they provide? Let me say, as President Cunningham mentioned, that the leaders of our units really stepped up to this task and submitted thoughtful but difficult options. The plans are well underway, but in many cases, the specific actions have not been finalized, and communication has not fully occurred internally or externally on those specific plans. We know enough to say with confidence that these decisions will impact all aspects of our mission. And we know enough to offer some examples of what will take place. Across units, academic programs and course offerings are being reviewed in depth to ensure they leverage faculty expertise in the right ways, are offered cost-effectively, meet growing demand in the right areas, and are sunset when they have limited or diminishing demand. Through this process, changes will take place in many units. Examples of potential impacts on services to students include a reduction in materials and staff available in university libraries, including the law library, a reduction in O&M supported student aid in some cases, changes in orientation and transition experiences for undergraduates on the Twin Cities campus, the merger of Boynton Health Services and student counseling services, and so on. In the research area, in addition to the reductions in direct grant work, these reallocation plans will lead to things like a reduction in mid-career research awards for faculty in CLA, a reduction in O&M support provided to core research facilities, centers, and institutes in the College of Science and Engineering, a discontinuation of research awards for residents in the College of Veterinary Medicine, and a reduction of research pilot awards through the Office of Academic and Clinical Affairs. And outreach activities will be scaled down, eliminated, or restructured. Here, examples include a reduction in the number of Minnesota Extension educators and extension specialists, elimination of the annual Institute for Building Officials and the College of Continuing and Professional Studies, and closure of the School of Nursing's Physicians Nurse Practitioners clinics. While a wide variety of expenditure categories will decrease, the most significant cost savings will come through position eliminations. Based on early reported estimates from units, we anticipate a reduction exceeding 350. There will be difficult and meaningful change. Moving to tuition revenue, you can see from this slide that there are a number of components that make up the estimated $71.8 million gain in our proposal. The largest portion would come from the recommended 6.5% increase in the resident undergraduate rates on the Twin Cities and Rochester campuses. For the Twin Cities, it is anticipated if all other Big Ten schools implement their plans as discussed at a meeting this spring, that the Twin Cities resident undergraduate rate will stay at 7th highest of 18 in the Big Ten, or at most moving to 6th highest. Of course, plans can change, but all schools are facing the same budget pressures or even more, so this is a likely outcome. The second most significant revenue gain would result from the recommended increases to the graduate school rates, plus a varying set of recommended rate changes for all other graduate certificate and professional programs that have their own unique rate structures. These unique rates are based on market comparisons and take into consideration demand, financial support available for students, students' earnings potentials, and cost. For FY26, outside of some rate restructuring plans, the changes generally range from 0 to 7.5%. The third category of revenue increase is the recommended 7.5% increase for the undergraduate non-resident rate on the Twin Cities campus. In this case, for the Big Ten comparisons, plans are a bit less clear, but if all other schools were to remain flat, which won't happen, our rate would move from 13th highest in the Big Ten to 10th. As I said, this is very unlikely that that will happen, and we will remain for sure in the bottom half at or very close to where we are now in the rankings. Most of the revenue gain from the final three categories will come as a result of projected enrollment growth in 14 of our tuition-generating units. For most, these are not large numbers, but gains on the margin. For the Crookston, Duluth, and Morris campuses, the recommendations are for smaller rate increases to maintain a larger differential with the Twin Cities campus. For Crookston and Duluth, it is a proposed 4% increase, and for Morris, it is a proposed 5% increase. A summary of the tuition rates is displayed on this table. It's difficult to identify a single dollar impact when there are so many different scenarios of student experience and characteristics, but it is worth noting that for students eligible for the state's North Star Promise program, which is 4,000 to 5,000 students at the university, their tuition and fees, including the increase, will be covered 100% by federal, state, and university sources. For the next income tier, the typical University of Minnesota undergraduate student with income above $80,000 but still qualifying for Minnesota state grants will see awards remain at or above the current year level depending on the campus and the student's financial circumstances. Thanks to the strong suite of financial aid programs in place, including federal Pell and SCOG grants, the two state grant programs, and the significant University Promise program, our University of Minnesota campuses will remain the lowest net price options in the state for resident undergraduate students with the greatest financial need. For those students, as well as those who do not qualify for need-based financial aid, we remain an incredible value. And finally, for this slide, as I mentioned just a moment ago, changes to the special graduate certificate and professional tuition rates do vary. All of the tuition rates for this year and proposed for next year are detailed in attachment 3 to the budget. And finally, related to tuition, the bumper sticker. We wanted to share some information that might be surprising to some. When adjusted for inflation, resident undergraduate tuition on the Twin Cities campus actually has decreased 7% from the 2013-14 academic year to the 22-23 academic year, even with the annual increases in the tuition rate. And moving that statistic forward, even with the rates we are proposing in this budget, the actual tuition rate adjusted for inflation will be down 3% next year from what it was 10 years ago. Repeating what President Cunningham said, we have not kept up with the rate of inflation. And a second way to look at it is noted on the second net price arrow here. After combining tuition with the other components in total cost of attendance and then factoring in financial aid awards, for students from families with incomes below $110,000, that final net price adjusted for inflation actually decreased 39% in that 2013 to 2023 timeframe. This tells you that the tuition was held down in years where we had other funding options, less cost growth and less uncertainty, and aid increased, making the cost of attending our Twin Cities campus more affordable than ever. In addition to the tuition rate changes, this budget incorporates a variety of changes in student fees. As occurs every year, we reviewed each proposed change to academic, course, and miscellaneous fees to ensure they are consistent with board policy. But I do want to call out just a few things about these fees. First, many of them do not cover the full expenses of the materials or activities that they support. Units must use state and tuition dollars to fill in. Second, with this budget, we are recommending an increase in the campus collegiate fees equal to the recommended increase in the resident undergraduate tuition fee, with a few exceptions that are identified in the budget document. And third, this budget includes two noteworthy changes related to facilities. We are recommending a $7.50 per term increase in the Twin Cities Capital Enhancement Fee, which supports a portion of the cost to maintain the facilities managed by Recwell, Boynton, and the Student Union. Moving forward, changes in this fee will also be tied to the changes in the tuition rate. And we are further recommending a new athletics facility fee on the Twin Cities campus for $100 per term, also to support a portion of the cost to maintain the various facilities this time managed by Gopher Athletics. Similar athletics fees already exist on the Crookston, Duluth, and Morris campuses, ranging from $69 to $111 per term, so this will bring the Twin Cities campus in line with what our other campuses are charging. The second category of fees is the mandatory student services fees, which are developed through a student-led process on each campus to review and ultimately recommend fee levels for a variety of activities. For FY26, you see the result of those processes in the gray table. In large part, these changes reflect realized and anticipated cost increases, but also support some minimal enhancements to programs and services. Finally, our student housing and dining programs continue to face significant cost increases, particularly for labor and food. For consistency, the rate changes proposed for FY26 included in the blue table here are generally for a double room and an unlimited meal plan where applicable, but the actual experience can definitely differ by student. Putting it all together, for a full-time resident undergraduate student living on campus with an unlimited meal plan, the cost increase will range from 3.8% to 6.8% depending on the campus. These are very real increases and painful for some, and unfortunately, but for the difficult decisions we've talked about today, these rates could have gone even higher given the stark and uncertain financial landscape before us. And again, I want to note that for students with the greatest financial need, those that are eligible for the North Star Promise program, the proposed cost increase you see here will be offset 45 to 55% at a minimum as a result of the guaranteed coverage of tuition and fees that program promises. Now let's move to a brief summary of what we propose allocating the framework resources to. So a little more information about the spending items listed way back on slide 12. First and foremost, the priority for this budget is to invest in our talented faculty and staff. We cannot move forward on any of our goals without making this investment, and because of its importance to this budget plan, I'm going to spend more time on it after explaining the rest of the list, so hold on to that topic for just a couple of slides. Beyond compensation, the investment plan as detailed on attachment 1 to the budget includes 6 categories of recurring spending, the summarized outcomes of which are highlighted here. The largest investment category in the budget this year is for program enhancements, the majority of which is related to student enrollment growth and increased or evolving student support and services. Rochester, Crookston, the College of Science and Engineering, the School of Nursing, and many others will be investing in faculty and staff to better meet the needs and expectations of current enrollment levels. This category also includes things like an expansion of the President's Emerging Scholars Program on the Twin Cities campus and expanding research support help to the Duluth campus, among other things. Following close behind in terms of magnitude of investment is the annual need to cover technology and facility-related cost increases. This is for the vendor licensing agreements on our large enterprise systems, and investment in information security, and then the utility and debt cost increases across all of our campuses. Included this year, for the first time in many, many years, is a recurring increase of $10 million to address repair and replacement needs across all of our campuses. You heard about this necessary plan in the capital budget presentation this morning, and this is where it hits the operating budget. Third, we are proposing to set aside $30 million of recurring resources, $15 million each, for two important pools: a new workforce reinvestment pool, which I will highlight further in a moment, and a new strategic investment pool to begin implementation of the Maroon Bold and Gold Plan and act on opportunities to strengthen our programming in areas that we want and need to grow. And then finally, our investments include the annual required increase in the President's Matching Scholarship Program, the need to offset small negative actual to budget tuition variances, and funding for a number of core services. Included in this last list are things like the structural imbalances that we knew we were carrying into FY26 for several units, increased library collections and software costs, additional compliance-related activities, more student tour guides, making permanent public safety enhancements in Dinkytown, and so forth. Beyond the recurring investments that I just summarized, Attachment 1 also identifies non-recurring investments. The total here is $82.2 million. The largest single item is the creation of a non-recurring $60 million strategic investment fund. This is to supplement the $15 million recurring investment that I just described, that new pool. Non-recurring funds like this allow for creativity and flexibility in moving forward with new ideas, creating pilot projects and matching and bridging programs and so on, while also allowing for one-time purchases. The second bullet here is a set-aside of $10 million to aid in any necessary transitions due to the loss of federal research funds, helping to ease the downsizing that might be necessary. And finally, Attachment 1 also includes a list of one-time investments that emerged as priority needs through the budget development process and from our units. Before highlighting the workforce investments, I want to just mention the recommended sources for these non-recurring investments. 74 million of the 82, so 90%, we are recommending to come from the balance in central reserves. We're projecting an ending balance in central reserves for the current year of roughly 160 million. It's recovered from the pandemic years by a combination of reduced draws to cover the revenue shocks during that time and increased returns thanks to good investment decisions, higher interest rates, and a growing base. And there are legal settlements running through that as well, and the timing sometimes doesn't match up with the revenue receipt. The planned ending balance in the fund next year will be $90 million, and that's after this recommended spending. We recommend leaving that level of balance to continue as part of the base funds generating additional interest earnings and as a reserve for potential areas of financial uncertainty in the next couple of years. The remaining 10% of the recommended non-recurring investments will be funded by the internal assessment system we have in place for addressing large technology system costs, the forecasted framework balance being held for recurring commitment in FY27, and central level O&M balances that have accumulated over time. To close out the detailed presentation of our proposed investments, I want to highlight the budget's plan for investments in our workforce. At $111.4 million, the single largest expense increase in this budget is what we have committed to compensation for our roughly 26,000 employees. The proposed plan for FY26 includes an overall pool increase for budgeting purposes of 4%, which importantly, though, must be thought of as several different pieces. First, a 3% general pool increase for civil service, P&A, and faculty, with an additional 1% market adjustment pool for those groups to address positions that are most behind the market in pay or where there are retention issues. Second, the approved contract for our organized graduate student union, which calls for a minimum increase of 3.5% in the context of the general 3% salary pool increase I just mentioned. And third, the as yet unknown requirements for the remaining labor represented employees. This proposed salary budget for FY26 recognizes today's inflation rates and remains above what was delivered during the pandemic years and prior. It is necessary, reasonable, and not exorbitant. I also want to touch on the incremental $15 million for a workforce reinvestment pool that has previously been mentioned. That's in addition to this $111.4 million. That pool will be distributed to cover costs associated with priorities emerging in response to the workforce resolution adopted by our governance groups. Initial priorities will address raising the floor and setting a per-unit base where applicable for teaching specialists and lecturers, raising the floor for non-contract faculty and research job family positions, and ensuring appropriate civil service pay levels within the overall compensation structure. The work of the committee charged with responding to the resolution and strategizing about the overall compensation plan for the institution is ongoing and will continue to inform the distribution of these funds and future budget recommendations. To wrap up this summary, I want to do two things. Give a shout out to my small but mighty team, Corinne Zewers and Emily Larson. They are indispensable in getting us through the process and developing these materials. And I want to emphasize that this budget is sitting at $5.1 billion, including our internal sales, and that the recommendations before you are the result of fiscally responsible but difficult decisions to keep it in balance. And now I'm pleased to turn the final words over to Executive Vice President Goldman.
Thank you, Vice President Conason, and thank you, President Cunningham, as well. Chair Hips and the members of the committee, I want to close by underscoring the big picture, the rationale behind the decisions we're asking your support on. The budget reflects tough choices, none of which we have taken lightly. The budget reflects choices that are smart, strategic, necessary, and we believe will put the university on the right path forward. First, we're investing in our people. We're proposing salary increases after years of underinvestment, 3% in merit and 1% in market. This is about retaining top talent, supporting staff that have been stretched too thin for too long, and signaling that our people are a top priority. Second, we're taking ownership of our infrastructure. The state is a critical partner, but flat funding in an inflationary environment puts enormous strain on our physical assets. As you heard, this budget allows us to begin thinking boldly by reinvesting in core buildings, addressing deferred maintenance, and to build a framework for a long-term capital plan that we control, we deliver, and we build. We cannot wait for others to define our destiny. We must do it ourselves. Third, our tuition proposal still reflects affordability and a great value for our students and their families. With this tuition proposal, inflation adjustment terms, students at the U are paying less than they did a decade ago. And students with the greatest financial need, our most vulnerable, are paying 39% less than they were 10 years ago. We've kept costs down, expanded aid, and maintained an exceptional value. Our tuition ranks 6th or 7th among the Big Ten peers, and this increase will not change that. We're balancing accessibility with the realities of inflation and the need to invest in our workforce and academic core. Finally, I want to recognize the work already underway. The 7% scope reduction you heard talked about by President Cunningham and Vice President Tolleson is no small feat. Colleges, campuses, our deans, and our chancellors across the system have already begun making hard choices to realign spending with mission. We know it's difficult, and we appreciate the leadership, creativity, and discipline that it takes. This is the budget we need right now. It reflects the financial realities that are in front of us, the needs of our students and employees, and a commitment to stewarding this institution into the future. With that, we're happy to take questions from you.
Thank you, and thank you. This is hard. I mean, nobody loves a tough budget in here. It's a lot of the stuff that got thrown on us, and that's just the way it is. And the state is flat, the federal government is unpredictable at best, and so we have to do what we have to do. And it's I think it's very reasonable. I like the fact that we're using our strategic using the reallocation strategically to take us to the future. A couple things I lose sleep over now is the under-investment in the research part of our house, because that's graduate students, that's everybody else, and in 20 years, we're going to have a huge shortage of faculty. And we're all going to be, because it's just, we're not going to educate them now, we're going to have a shortage later. So I worry about that. I worry about what's happened to our economic engine for the state if we underinvest at the University of Minnesota, because we do a great job there. One thing I looked at, so when you said we're ranked 6th or 7th, in tuition even after these changes. That's from the bottom, right? That, from the top, okay. So 12, okay. So meaning, say that again.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee,
Yeah.
that would be the highest tuition. We are 6th or 7th from the highest.
Okay, sounds good, thank you.
So middle.
Middle, yeah. Great. That's where we kind of always are in Minnesota, we're kind of middle. So it seems like, don't want to be too good, you know, so anyway, appreciate it. I appreciate all the work that you and your staffs have put into this. It's a tremendous balancing act, and, budgets are tough. They're tough for boards to look at, they're tough to, I just want you to know that, we're all concerned and whatever, but I think you really presented a great budget, and it's what we have to do. So I'll turn it over to Regent Johnson.
Thank you, Chair Hipsch, and thank you to everybody who worked on this budget. It's an extraordinarily difficult moment in history. So just a couple of questions and a couple of comments. First of all, we know where we are in the Big Ten. I'm just curious where we are with compared to the state university system as far as tuition increases go, or what we know in that so far.
So I don't know, VP Thompson, do you want to do, I mean, they're obviously waiting for their announcement, but there are a few things we have heard, although we would caveat them with, of course, they need to make their own announcements. So do you want to?
That's correct. Mr. Chair, members, Regent Johnson, what we have heard, although it has been presented in different ways, it's not approved yet, and they haven't acted on it. But for their four-year institutions, they're ranging from 6 to 8% increases, averaging 6.5%. For their two-year institutions, they are ranging from 4 to 5, averaging 4.5%. That's what they're proposing right now.
And if I may, Regent Johnson, so, and I would set aside the two-year colleges, those are not our competitors. So and we really are a very different, we have a different mission and focus than the state universities in total, but that 6.5 to 8% is what we're understanding, again, that their board is still working through. So we are very much in line with that. And I will say we're only in line with that because we've done such other hard work internally, because unlike our state partners, we have as much federal research as we do O&M appropriation, and that's been cut dramatically. So while our state partners do have some occasional federal funding from research grants, we are the only university in the state that has hundreds of millions of dollars of federal grants, and those we are taking a cut on. And so the fact that we are able to keep tuition only at the same level of increase that they are, in the face of dramatic federal cuts as well, which is, VP Tannelson noted, are going to represent 24% of our total budget at risk, with, we already know, $40 to $50 million cut, is a demonstration of the hard decisions we're making internally to make on scope reductions to try to keep tuition down. Otherwise, no doubt, since we bear that additional federal burden, we would have had to raise tuition higher than the 6.5 and be talking about that 8 level that they are talking about.
Thank you. And I did want to thank the President's office. I submitted a whole bunch of written questions yesterday, and they got all of my answers,
With thanks
responses
to
back.
this
Thank
team.
you. The other thing I'm wondering is, and perhaps this goes to the Vice Presidents, or the President, but I'm wondering if the administration can provide us some information, maybe in the fall or October or so, on non-tuition methods for raising funds. I know you've talked a lot about becoming more self-sufficient, and I'm hoping that there can be some creative outside-the-box thinking on how we raise revenues from different revenue streams outside of increasing tuition.
I'll let VP Goldman go in a moment. There there are some creative solutions. I want to point out also, as VP Tomlinson said, they had that, a lot of that creativity there's more creativity to be had, but a lot of that has been done. We've increased our non-tuition revenues substantially if you look at it over the years, which is one of the reasons that, that the tuition has been kept down as low as it has for so long. So some of those pieces have definitely come to bear. In addition, I'll remind folks we will have a new capital campaign this fall and next year in partnership with the foundation, and we'll continue to look to raise money for strategic priorities and growth for the university, including capital investments with good partners, although that those sources can never replace state and federal sources. So there are some creative ways, and we can talk about P3 partnerships and other components like that. But although it is popular, there is no magic wand. Our main revenue sources, are state, federal funding, and tuition. I mean, that's the way we get our salary, so to speak. Yeah.
And let me add to that. I think President Cunningham framed it well. Things we can look at from where I sit that I think we have to start to think about. First is online, and Crookston and that campus and other campuses do a great job with that. How can we expand that? If we think about a national presence, and as you may have heard, we're undertaking an enrollment plan and starting to think about with Vice President Gotti and others, how do we start to increase enrollment nationally? And more importantly, if you look at our non-resident, right now, 16% of our non-resident students, let me say that again, only 16% of our non-resident students pay non-resident tuition. Now, lots of reasons around that. I don't want to get into that today, but I do think that's something we need to look at. I think there are things around public-private partnerships and ways that we could think big and bold on some other things and some other institutions have done. They may not be right for us. They may be right for us. I'm a big believer you take a hybrid of what others have done across the country and try to create our own best practice around it. So certainly, I don't think we rest on anything we've done. I think we continue to try to see how do we get every lever of revenue to increase across all that we do.
Thank you. And one last one, and I might submit some more in writing if that's okay. I know we have to look at this next week. So as a former faculty member, I stay in touch with a lot of deans and faculty members. And the question that came up a couple of times was the proposal mentions new tracking and monitoring of unit spending that will include quarterly meetings, and the presentation expands on this to say there will be a strengthened provost budget review process for hiring of faculty as well as a new review process for staff. There are concerns about how this reduces the authority of deans and their flexibility in responding to this historical moment factors when you note were very important in getting us to this moment. Why is this centralization of authority over hiring decisions necessary? Will this be a permanent thing? And if so, why would it be permanent?
Not permanent.
It's not permanent. So let me break that down into two sides of our business. So on the academic side, our schools and colleges, they do currently submit to the provost office an annual academic plan for recruiting of tenured and non-tenured track faculty. I'm looking at Provost Kirsten, and she is saying yes. Tenured. Now, what we don't do is provide a financial check and balance in that request. So the deans submit, which is their autonomy to do. The provost says, yes, this makes sense. What we're adding to the system is via VP Tonnison's group saying, can the school, based upon their enrollment projections, based upon our enrollment plans, can they afford that faculty? And the reason we do that is if we don't, it could push some schools into structural deficits unintentionally, and we just want to check and balance in that system to make sure financially we believe they can afford it. On the academic side, no other protocols are going to take place other than monthly reporting so that we can keep a pulse on the hiring, the posting, and our workforce.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, President Cunningham. Okay, on the non-academic side, what we're doing, we all lived through COVID, where we all very quickly put in hiring pauses, hiring freezes. What we're going to do here is put a thoughtful protocol in place in order for our non-academic areas to go through a process by way of a review committee. That will be myself, VP Horstman, and VP Tonneson, just to keep a pulse on future spending, to keep a pulse on the hiring out in our administrative units. You know, there's lots of concerns ahead, as you've talked about. The state budget, you know, the governor yesterday was talking about calling a special session again if this federal funding shortfall. So a lot of this is to keep a pulse on what's happening so that we can react and respond as quickly as possible. President Cunningham, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, thank you. You completely described this. So, I mean, there really are two pieces Regent Johnson has described. So one is across the country, if you're following higher education news, the vast majority of our peers have put in austerity measures similar to what was done during COVID. Hiring freezes, flat hiring freezes, merit salary freezes, et cetera, into place. Austerity measures, looking ahead at that 25% of their budget at risk that we pointed to, they are looking to be prudent during this time, right? We have done all of these other measures in place, and with that, want to respect that the deans and the chancellors have already done a lot of hard work in looking at where they can reduce their budgets to try to give them the maximal autonomy. So we're not instituting a hiring freeze in those academic units, but we do need to have a sense of where we're growing now in this very difficult time and keep track on that centrally. So that's meant to be a cautionary financial prudence measure during this time where they, provide reports monthly or so on what that hiring is, so we cannot be surprised by any unit hiring at this time where we still don't know what's going to happen in 3 and 6 months with federal budgets. In terms of the other process of the verification process, this is just good business practice that something that organically we didn't have in place here. Units academically provide hiring plans. Academically and strategically, they make a lot of sense. It is fiscally prudent that we make sure that while those decisions are made academically, that we have good central fiscal checks on to make sure that they really can afford them so they don't get themselves into structural deficits. Our deans are excellent finance folks. That is unusual and unlikely to happen, but that is the check we need to make sure in place, especially as our projected costs, expenses in the next year have potential such big variance. We want to be in lock arm with our units in making sure that they're not over enthusiastically growing in some area that we may not be able to afford. It is not meant to provide anything else. So that's the background on those.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Regent Johnson. Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the conversation. Before I get to my question, I'll pick up right where the president left off, just with a clarification. VP Goldman, is that procedure uniform in non-academic units, right? If IT wanted to extend a position, are they doing the same in terms of centrally validating? And I do recognize that faculty is a little different because tenure is a bit more of a commitment than an administrative position might be. But how does that work in non-academic spaces?
So in the non-academic part of our enterprise, it would be this protocol that we'll put into place, every area, every department to go through this. Right now, we have about 800 positions across all parts of our enterprise that are posted. That would be faculty, that would be staff, that would be students. So pulling out the academic, this would be for the non-academic part of our enterprise. So it would be things like IT, things like facility, things like HR, things like student services. And once again, unlike COVID, where it was an immediate response and there was a lot of no's, this is really just to keep good fiscal hygiene and to really be able to keep our finger on the pulse to know what's out there and to make sure that we're making the wise decisions. The last thing we want to do is bring people in times when we might have to go in the other direction.
Yep, no, totally agree. That makes sense, and supportive of why that's necessary now, and imagine will evolve as the situation evolves, obviously, and flex that autonomy back to the units as needed.
Yeah, correct. This is not something that will be in place forever. it's something that I hope we can end as soon as possible as the turbulence and uncertainty ends as well.
Yeah, appreciate the prudence. Mr. Chair, I guess jump to my comment, if you will. Challenging circumstances, and appreciate President, your team, VP Thomason, for all the work on this. I'll keep my comments high level. Earlier this week, Vice Chair Hibbs, Chair Mayron, and myself got to meet with the student representatives, and Representative Moreno was there, as well as Representative Smith and Aremu. And I'll call out something interesting that came up in our conversation. We brought up tuition, actually, just to say, hey, this is out there. We'd like your thoughts. And he'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I'll start. I mean, the first thing we heard is that they actually get it. And they walked us through their understanding of the circumstances and of the value that they place in their faculty, in having high quality faculty, Regent Davenport, but also continuity, especially in graduate and professional studies and whatnot. But there was a feeling that these tough times we're in are kind of being, the burden is not being spread out equally. I mean, I think that's the sense, that I got. And with budgets, it's you don't want to pit groups against each other. You could pick any two budget items and say, well, if we don't do this, then we can do that, or vice versa. I mean, it could be arbitrary, essentially, with anything you pick in the budget. But obviously, the marginal things here, the compensation and the tuition. So it's kind of understandable why those two rise to the top. So that was just an interesting conversation. And I guess what I posed to the administration as a question or whatever, I mean, what is the answer there? And that, hey, I get it, to the students, like, I get it, but why is my tuition going up and their compensation going up? And there was that feeling that it's not being borne equally. And I know that's not what's happening. So if you could kind of help talk about that the value, I suppose, which they did understand. And maybe after your comments, I'll ask the student representative to chime in, because it was a very productive, conversation that we had with them.
Yeah, and I will start with where you started a little bit, which is the things we're doing are for the students in order to have a high quality education here. And to, Regent Gully's comments over the years, faculty, including, looking forward as we think about our adjunct faculty, but all the people that are teaching our students, how, they are, feel like they're compensated fairly. So this is, the inflation numbers that we put out there this year, right? The inflation at that estimated about 3.5%. If the staff that are working across the system and the faculty don't receive that inflation, basically cost of living increase that's based on their performance, everybody doesn't get it. They have to be good performing. Then we're actually asking them to cut their salaries as well now, which is what we've asked them to do for the past basically 5 or 8 years, right? So in those past years, that slide that VP Townsend puts up, with where they got a 1% or they had a salary freeze. So what we've asked them to do year over year over year is keep the students' tuition down by taking that out of their salaries for the last several years. So what this is now is trying to balance actually that, and we feel like this budget actually balances that historic ask over the many years of our workforce with what's needed now. And it is those two levers. It's not that you could pick any two levers. It's that the biggest revenue source is tuition or state funding, right, or federal funding, and the biggest cost is our people, because our people are what deliver on our mission. And so both are very important. Again, I'll remind folks that with this, for our students, one of the other things I think about is we're balancing it, although the dollars are certainly very real and will be felt. We are the most affordable 4-year institution for students under $110,000 in the state of Minnesota, even with these increases. So we're providing a tremendous value. The percent numbers are high, but that affordability is, on some of our campuses, the tuition is still under $14,000 a year, and in our Twin Cities, it is $16,000, $17,000 a year. Those are real dollars, but in the scheme of higher education broadly, we are still providing an exceptional, affordable education for our in-state students here, where we are prioritizing. And then in terms of how they're bearing that versus they're bearing that alone, they certainly are not. We mentioned that there will be workforce reductions based on this. Easily of about 300 people. With the federal research dollars lost, we anticipate about another 200 people. There will be reductions in workforce. That workforce, I think, would say that they are feeling and sharing the burden of that, and the people who are left are bearing the burden then of how they're going to pick up the work to manage that reduced workforce and reduced scope. And with that, making sure that they're not also getting basically, in essence, a salary cut is important. And now we have to double down and figure out how we support scholarships, how we support the financial aid, and focus on our mission for those that need, that for those dollar amounts are the most important. I hope that helps.
Yeah.
And I see Regent Gully came off there too as well, yeah.
Yeah, it does, Madam President. And Mr. Chair, I know I invoked the student representative, so with your permission, if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chair Hibsch, and thanks, President Cunningham. Yeah, our conversation was mostly, as a student rep, we understand the tuition increases. Not every student understands that, and that's okay. Like, we get it. We talked about what can we do to make that more visible, like why we're doing these increases, why we're doing this, and it could be as simple as the games that the students go to, put up a 10-second blurb of, thank you for coming to the games, your tuition, your payment for the tickets has helped do this, this, and this. Just those small blurbs that there's the visibility that, hey, this is the reason why we're able to do this. Your contribution has helped us do this, or just small things that the students can see visibly. Because not every student's gonna, watch the Board of Regents meetings. Not every student's gonna do that. Most students probably.
Riveting.
Right. But just having those small visibilities that the students can see, that they can see, like, oh yeah, my tuition is going towards this. Obviously, it's going towards their degree and everything. But even the smaller things that they're like, yeah, I guess paying for a ticket actually goes towards this. Going to this event goes towards this. So just those small visibility actions.
If I may, Representative Marino, I think. As we look towards this year, I do hope that we students and our workforce will be able to see where these choices are leading them are, because it's not only difficult decisions of things that will be cut. It will be buildings that get actually repaired, not just the bricks that are falling off of them, but hopefully, an improved classroom facility that will be meaningful to the students that are working there, improved lab facilities that are meaningful for the students that are there. And then also the harder to see part, but then is the workforce who feels valued, who then can contribute more meaningfully to the excellent teaching experience that I know that they're providing and giving you that excellent educational opportunity that we have here by maintaining a valued workforce, because our workforce has other choices as well, both our staff locally here and our faculty.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'm pretty much done. I was just on that last point, and it was this idea in our conversation that tuition doesn't have to be taboo just to come up, when it's at the board meeting and it's negative, just really driving home the value of it and kind of drawing the link, as the president just made very clear, like throughout the year, look, we know you paid it, and let's communicate that continuously, not just taboo when it's an unfortunate conversation as this one in the spring.
Yeah, and I want to add, if I can, Regent Kenyanya, we talk about a historic tuition increase. I also want to talk about the historic. It has been, VP Tennyson, 20 years since we've had a flat state budget, 15 years, a lot of years.
I'll say yes.
So
Right.
the two are linked with the most gratefulness to our state budget, but we have a historic thing on one side, and then with that we have a historic component on the other side. And so when you talk about students at the Capitol, yes, students at the Capitol, absolutely. And then, for for kind of my colleagues out there in the ether that talk about the difference between this and sort of the way back time machine of how things used to be, you know, when they went to school in the 70s and 80s and 90s. You know, we right now, when you saw that pie chart that VP Tonneson put forward, we're deeply grateful for the state support. It is about it only covers 14% of our costs right now. In the 1970s, it covered 45, 50% of university costs, which is why tuition was not on the burden of families. And that is true across the country, and Minnesota actually has kept up more than many, many states, for which we're very grateful. But that national trend shifts the costs from where it used to be, which was about half of the university was paid for by the state, to today, where we have very grateful for the 14% that we will use wisely.
Thank you for that, and I want to remind everybody that it's been flattened for 25, it's going flat for 26 and 27,
Right.
unless we get a supplemental budget next year, so that's, at 3% inflation per year, that's 9% flat, you know, and so that's a huge number as well, so.
That's that 75 million.
Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair Hips. There's a lot to say. I won't say everything, but the conversation has caused me to reflect not just on because it is our last meeting, some of us, 6 years here, but my 40-plus years in higher ed. But first, I want to thank the legislature for not cutting us.
Yes.
And for maintaining our budget, and appreciate that. And just as you both were saying, these challenges are not new. Now, my history thinking is that 2010 was the beginning of this big downturn, so 15 years of pretty much flat or negative. And I think it's very important that we go back and take a look at that slide that both President Cunningham and Vice President talked about on page 138, and that's the inflation slide. And everyone, I'd like to go back to look at that. We must face the reality of these financial sustainability challenges. It's very difficult. And I say that 2015 marker because they've been reallocating, our deans and department chairs reallocating and cutting for that. Now we're asking them another 7%, which we have to do. Tuition increases are always tough votes. They're always tough. I appreciate the comments of Representative Morano. I think students do, when they look at what they get in return, understand, nobody likes it, but they understand the tuition increases. And I think, again, VP Tonneson's comments about how we compare to our peers, and we've asked about that, and also min-state tuition, which what I heard was 3.5% to 9%. And again, reminding ourselves that the two-year colleges are a big part of that system, and they're a very, very different mission. And the state U's have a more comprehensive local mission too. I always look at tuition as and higher ed funding as a three-legged stool: government, university, family, students. I think all legs are wobbly right now, and that's unfortunate, but I think we do all share the responsibility for these budgets and tuition increases, and I do want to really thank, because I know how hard it is, those working, and Regent Kenny and I think have minimized the burden on students in this regard and in this budget. So for 6 years now, you've heard me continue to say, invest while we cut, and this budget does that. We're investing in employees, innovation research, student services, and very important, the strategic plan. And I also, what the non-reoccurring items you laid out, I think that is a good plan. That's what reserves are for, and I support that. And if I've learned another thing over my career in higher ed is that there are many, many things required to run a university. And to run a university of high quality and especially serve our mission And our state, I've learned from my time here as a regent, the magnitude of the University of Minnesota system, and that what would our state be without us? And so again, we must recognize the challenges. They're increasingly difficult challenges. They're increasingly unknowns related to that. And we must balance our budget, which, again, thank you to everybody who's worked on that this does it. And so I will support the proposed budget. And again, I just want to thank everybody in the university community who's been working through these challenges. And these are just it's a very difficult era in higher education. And they're not going to go away. I won't be here, but you'll face them again next year and the next and the next. And hopefully things will turn around. So thank you.
Great comments. Thank you, Regent Davenport. We're going to miss you, all of you guys on this board. So, yeah, it's going to be tough to see you leave. Any other comments? I'm not hearing any. Okay, we'll move to the, did you want to?
Can I just wrap up with one thing, which is I think it's possible to kind of feel grim with this budget in the year we're in. But echoing a little bit on what Regent Davenport said is we provide, and what this budget aims to do is to continue to provide towards the future of what is an excellent education for our students and an excellent research and discovery experience. And we can emerge from this difficult financial time with this planning into being even a stronger university that provides at an affordable rate and an incredibly impactful student experience for the citizens of Minnesota and beyond. So I just want to leave people with some hope. Difficult budgets are difficult, but with them you plan towards the future, and that's what we're doing here by making difficult decisions for the excellence that we need to support the students who do pay tuition, for which it is a lot of funding to do. We need to make sure that they have excellence in their facilities and their teaching and their quality of the work that they get here. So thank you.
Thank you, President Cunningham. Okay, so moving on to the next item of business, which is to review and act on a resolution related to the university's commercial paper facility. To present the resolution are Executive Vice President Goldman and Vice President Volna. Executive Vice President Goldman, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Chair Hipsch and members of the committee. Next, we bring forward a recommended resolution that reflects a key element of our financial strategy, maintaining nimbleness and readiness in the face of uncertainty. I think by now the theme is clear. We are operating in an increasingly unpredictable environment. Market shifts, federal and state policy, and funding changes, and our unexpected costs can all impact our ability to deliver on our mission. In this environment, access to cash on short-term notice is essential. Increasing our commercial paper capacity provides us with another way to have ready access to cash. It gives us the flexibility to react quickly and responsibly to unplanned financial pressures without overcommitting long-term resources. It's a tool used by many of our peer institutions and one that we've used thoughtfully in the past. In short, this recommendation is a prudent, forward-looking step and a smart risk management strategy. It ensures we have access to short-term, low-cost capital when we need it most, whether for capital projects or to stabilize operations during volatility. With that, I turn over to Mike Volna to walk us through, Vice President Mike Volna, to walk us through the details of the proposal. Mike.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Hipsch, EVP Goldman, I appreciate it. In corporate finance, there's kind of an old saying that when times get tough, cash is king. And this recommendation really gives us a tool that aligns with that age-old maxim. Talk a little bit about what commercial paper is. Some of you know, some of you may not. Commercial paper is a form of borrowing. It's a form of short-term debt. Typically, it's issued for up to 270 days. It can be paid down at any time, or it can be rolled. Interest rates are locked in only for the period of time that you have it outstanding, and if you decide to roll it, you pay a new interest rate. You should think about it like a credit card, except it doesn't come with a piece of plastic that you carry in your pocket, but it has that level of nimbleness and flexibility. We do have a program today that uses commercial paper. The board has authorized a $400 million limit on commercial paper issuances by the university. That was increased, I should say, in 2017 from, I think, the limit at that time was about 200 million. I wasn't able to actually find what the old limit was. We can only use it by board policy for capital projects, and if we decide to use it for operations, we're required to come back to the board and seek approval to do so. Based on what we currently have used or have outstanding of that 400 million, today we have about $160 million available that we could issue if needed. So when you put that in the context of what you've heard so far today about kind of the things that we're facing, we think recommending an increase to $700 million or a $300 million increase over the authorized $400 million is a prudent step. Why do we think this? Because as EVP Goldman said, it's a very quick, nimble way to get your hands on cash. It's an alternative to spending down other reserves we have or other pots of money like TIP or GIP. Those certainly can be liquidated, but they may take time. You should think of commercial paper and the way we are talking about it today as another form of a reserve, quite frankly. And we would propose that we use it for either capital financing, like we always have, or for operating activities where, as EVP Goldman said, we have a need to stabilize an operation or an activity that has experienced a very sudden, unprecedented change in revenues or expenses. The advantages of the commercial paper program and are increasing it would be that we would have quick access. There are no legal restrictions other than what the board has in policy. Very low cost. I just checked rates earlier today, and we're paying somewhere between 2.9 and 4.4%. We could leave it outstanding indefinitely, or we could pay it off, very similar to a credit card. And best of all, if you approve this increase, if we never issue that additional $300 million, it doesn't cost us a penny. This is really just a safety net. It's important for the board to understand also that there are limitations. Remember, debt is not permanent revenue. If you issue it and you spend it, you have to pay it off eventually. It does come with an interest cost. Because it's short-term and you would roll it, it is subject to interest rate changes between when you roll and issue and reissue. And there could be some other technical things if the market went terribly wrong. There are always risks like we saw in 2008 and during COVID. And we have additional procedures that we have in place and controls that we have in place to protect against those as well. Let me turn now just for a second to the resolution that you have in your materials. So the key elements of that resolution are that it does authorize an increase to $700 million. Importantly, it would authorize the treasurer to issue CP for operations without prior board approval from the date that you approve it through June 30th of 2027. We think that's important because it could be that we are faced with a situation where we need to get our hands on cash in a time fashion that is quicker than we could get the board together to exercise that prior approval. We would report to the board after the fact any uses of commercial paper for operations. And then the resolution authorizes us to make all of the additional offerings, legal documents, and so forth that are necessary to really effectuate this. We've done this in the past. We used commercial paper during COVID, and it was important to have that available on top of the reserves that you know about that Julie has talked about and so forth. So in summary, as said, I think this is an additional tool to manage financial risk. It provides quick and flexible access to cash. It is in line with practices at other institutions, and you have in your packet a little one-pager that we get from our debt advisors that kind of is showing what other schools are doing. I just learned yesterday that Michigan State will be going this week to their board to increase their line of credit from $250 to $500 million. So it's very in line and very common. We've talked to the rating agencies. They see this as a prudent risk management tool. And I mean, we've just talked to them in the last week or so, and they would be comfortable with this. And like I said, it really kind of puts us in alignment with kind of a best practice. And by the way, the Debt Management Advisory Committee that met back in May also thought this was a prudent move. So with that, we recommend approval of it, but we'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Before we turn to discussion, is there a motion to approve on behalf of the board the resolution related to increasing the maximum amount of commercial paper facility and providing further authorization is used for operating purposes?
So moved.
Okay, motion and second. Okay, discussion. I'll just say I think it's a great tool to have in the toolbox, and on certain times we may need it. If we don't need it, we don't need it, but to have it there is just a really smart thing. Regent Wheeler.
Yeah, I'll just say that, both Doug and I in our positions as chair and vice chair of this committee sit on the debt management committee, and Mike mentioned this, but that besides having Mike, Vice President Volna, there we go, and his exceptional staff there, there's an advisory group that includes, those from industry and those from governmental entities, and they were totally endorsive of this, and these are really smart people who are deep into it. So I just wanted to underscore that piece. So I'm fully supportive.
Thank you. Thank you, Regent Wheeler. Regent Kanyanya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also in support of the resolution, I think last meeting, Vice President Volna and I had a chance to chat about this, and my particular, just from the governance mindset, my eyes were drawn to the change of the administration being able to issue, but then report after the fact. But in our conversation, I realized whatever it's used for would still be subject to board threshold. So really, this is it's the mechanisms that we're delegating, which that's who they should be delegated to, right? I mean, it's not that then large expenses of this amount could happen, because those things would still be subject per other board policies, either approved through the budget or capital projects approved in other ways. So definitely in support of this. And the last exercise close to this was the Century Bond, and that's proven to be successful. So definitely supportive of this effort as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion? Regent Mayor.
Thank you. Focusing on that provision as well, which would allow the administration to make these decisions to use it for operating expenses. What gives me comfort in the resolution is the language that basically puts some parameters around under what circumstances it could be used for operating expenses, which is a significant unplanned change in revenues or expenses and which jeopardizes the university's working capital liquidity or financial stability. So this isn't in a vacuum to be used, not that the administration would willy-nilly or our treasurer would, but there are parameters regarding its use. That gives me comfort.
Very good. President Cunningham.
Yeah, this is an emergency fund, not a routine plan. This is a backup plan. Yeah.
Okay, any other discussion? If not, you appear ready to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. The motion passes. Okay. Next, we will consider the consent report. Executive Vice President Goldman, will you summarize the items in today's report?
Thank you, Chair Hips and members of the committee. The consent report includes several items for your approval today. These include amendments to the university civil service rules, appointments and reappointments to the Board of Trustees for the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum Foundation, employment agreements for 3 leadership roles: Executive Vice President and Provost, Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost in Duluth, and head women's basketball coach on the Twin Cities campus. The report also includes 3 purchases over $5 million, including prescription and over-the-counter drugs and supplies for Boynton, system-wide paid leave administration, and security services for the Twin Cities campus. A resolution authorizing the potential refunding of outstanding general obligation bonds if favorable market conditions arise, and approval to allocate $68.2 million from the long-term capital financing program to support 4 projects, including the off-site collections facility and the Beaker Sand Plain Research Farm. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, before I invite a motion to approve the consent report, you are welcome to ask questions, make comments, or ask for an item to be separated out from the report to be voted on separately. Are there any questions, comments, or requests to separate an item out? Okay, hearing none. Is there a motion to approve on behalf of the board the consent report?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Okay. Getting close, guys. That brings us to the informational items. Executive Vice President Goldman, anything to highlight?
Thank you, Chair Hipsch and members of the committee. For our informational items, I'll highlight that the notice of intent to dispose of 3 properties described in the board docket is just the start of the process. Any proposed sale of property, including specific buyer terms, will return to the board for a full review and action at future meetings. The docket also includes a preview of our 2026 state capital request, which proposes $242.5 million for asset preservation, space realignment, biomanufacturing, and academic health science facilities in Duluth. We must submit a preliminary report to the state next week, but we will be making other adjustments per our conversations earlier in this meeting and submit a final request in October. That is my report, Chair Hipsch.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, there being no additional business before this committee, we stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.